What's going on, everybody? You're listening to the Musician's Mentor podcast. I'm your host, Travis Mark, and today we talk to my brother from another mother, Joe Gelini. Joe is a drummer, band leader, songwriter based out of New Orleans, and he is a two-time Grammy-nominated artist with his band Chawa. You got to check out Chawa. I've put some links in the show notes. Super cool band. And I thought it'd be cool to speak with Joe just about everyday life, musicianship, music business, touring, etc., etc., etc. We also talk a little bit about a couple deeper things, which I'm not going to go into during the introduction. But I hope you get something from this. And if you are getting something from this, like I've said before, please share it, or maybe at least tell people who you think could learn something from this about it. Continue to give us reviews and ratings and likes and follows and all of that stuff. We appreciate it. And that's it. Let's get going. Ladies and gentlemen, Joe Gelini.
Hey, buddy.
Hey, man. How's it going?
Great. How are you?
Good. How is your Thursday going? Is it going as good as the weather finally seems to be?
It's going smashingly well so far.
Good. All right. Well, so let's jump straight into it then. So I know I briefly discussed with you before this conversation kind of what I'm hoping to do here. So we're not going to go too much into that. We're basically just going to have a chat, and we're going to talk about the music industry and music business and kind of ups and downs of it, and maybe you can share some of your experiences with people. And we're going to kind of just steer the conversation sort of in the direction it seems to organically want to go. However,
Cool.
That being said, what I've been doing with everybody, if it's okay, would you maybe just give us a brief introduction as to who you are, what you have done, or what you're currently up to? Just a couple things that will kind of allow the listeners to understand where you might be coming from.
Sure. My name is Joe Gelini. I live in New Orleans, Louisiana, and I am the drummer and band leader of the two-time Grammy-nominated Mardi Gras Indian funk band Chawa.
Woo! That's awesome, man. And for those who don't know, Chawa rule. So go and check them out. I'll put some links in the show notes as usual, and you can find that in the descriptions and stuff like that. So Joe, let's back it up a little bit. So, I mean, I know Chawa do very well down here. I know you guys are touring a lot. We're going to get into the touring thing and stuff like that as the conversation kind of transpires. But what was kind of your musical upbringing? Obviously, growing up in New Orleans, there's music everywhere. Were you instantly sort of bitten by the musical bug, or was there a certain sort of road you took to get into music?
Well, I grew up in New England. I lived in Rhode Island and Connecticut until I was graduated from high school, and then I moved to Boston, Massachusetts, and attended Berklee College of Music and lived in Boston for 5 years before I moved to New Orleans. But my dad, who was a businessman and traveled, probably about as much as I do right now, would often come to do business down in New Orleans, and he would bring back, CDs and tapes and records and posters and all sorts of stuff from places like Tipitina's and Snug Harbor. And, I got to become familiar with the Neville Brothers and Astro Project and Louis Armstrong and Dr. John and the Meters and Professor Longhair and stuff like that. And, when I moved down here, I felt like, even though I had gone to this prestigious music college, I really was able to cut my teeth in New Orleans, and then I really had to learn a whole nother, the language of music down here, which essentially comes from the streets. So it's been an incredible education just living in New Orleans, culturally, musically, personally, spiritually,
Yeah. And the food's pretty good
the whole
too.
nine yards. Well, I married a chef, so I really knocked it out of the park.
Yeah, dude. I mean, what more could you ask for, huh?
Yeah, I mean, I married up. You know, I did good. So my wife is actually born and bred here, and she's been great. She teaches culinary arts at the New Orleans Center for Creative Arts, which is the performing arts high school down here that has become well known over the years, and most recently um, Ellis Marsalis had been teaching there for many years. The father of Winton and Brantford and Jason, and and then John Batiste and Trombone Shorty obviously are like fixtures of the music community now, like around the world, and they're ambassadors for that place. So our family definitely has, and then my father-in-law is a drummer, so and my daughter is now starting to play drums. So it's really there's a lineage that sort of defines what New Orleans music is, because it can go through so many generations.
Yeah.
So I'm glad to be add to that in whatever uh, modest way that I can.
So let's talk a little bit about Chawa. That Mardi
Sure.
Gras Indian thing, that's very special to the culture down here. And you guys, you kind of incorporate so many different styles. Um, like if I was to describe you to somebody, I would kind of say it's almost like a dancey, not as in sort of techno music, but dancey as in you can dance to it, kind of funk, gang vocal kind of rock kind of thing. It's like you throw so many different sort of influences in the mix, but you're the predominant songwriter in that band. Am I right?
Uh, yeah, I suppose I am. I've definitely had tons of collaborations with other, current and former band members that we've written songs together. Either in a small or large way. There have been songs that we've released that are cover songs. There are songs that have been written entirely by certain members of the band in the past. I've always just tried to encourage. I don't know always, but as after maybe my first CD, I started to try to encourage whoever was playing with me to be able to contribute to the songwriting. So, but yeah, I have done the majority of it. I think total, if you count everything up. But I'm always happy to collaborate with other musicians, either in the band or out of the band, or whatever is going to make the best record. And so far we've had pretty good luck with making good records.
You've got great records, dude. So I want to delve a little bit more into the songwriting thing here for a second, because again, the whole point here, besides a listener trying to get to know who you are, is to try and like just spread a little insights about things that I feel maybe don't get spoken about much in the music world. And what I mean by that is, you know, there's books and magazines and podcasts that will teach you about so many different elements about the music industry, but often they don't seem to talk about some of the more political things, or the you know the the stuff that really no one wants to talk about, the hardships, the parts that make being in a band a bit of a pain, or
Mm.
feel like a relationship that sometimes is just butting heads. And so on that note, just going back to the songwriting thing, And I'm going to kind of briefly pull it towards something that happened to me in the past, but I'd just like to know your take on it. So, how do you guys go about deciding? Now, obviously, if you come to the band with a finished song, that's a different story. You can go, "Oh, I wrote this song." But if you're in a group setting and there's a couple of you sitting in the room, and maybe people think that they've put more into an idea than they possibly did. How do you guys decide and talk about that beforehand so that you can almost decide on publishing rights before the song is even released? I've had this experience a couple of times, and I'll tell you about mine once I hear about yours. But I always found this a bit tricky in my own experiences.
Sure. Well, it's I often say whenever you mix art and commerce, something is bound to get misconstrued or um, misinterpreted, or you know, you could have disagreements or any of that stuff. I will say that my policy so far has just to before we go into whatever stage. Sometimes it's been later than I want it to be, but it's before the album comes out. We try to, and hopefully before we even record the record. Sometimes things happen when you're recording that happen where someone might add a, a lyrical or melodic element to the song that requires them getting a share of it, which obviously, changes the overall percentage. But, I think there's understanding about how songwriting, publishing goes is the first step. Because if you have a song and, half of the publishing is it's a complicated thing, so basically, with any song, part of the half of it's music and half of it's lyrics. And you can, if you contribute to one side of that, you split up each side into percentages, and it literally, when you register the song with BMI or ASCAP, you have to put something that adds up to 100%. So, if I wrote, just hypothetically, if I wrote, uh, you know, 100% of the music and someone else wrote 100% of the lyrics, then I would own 50% of the song because the the music is 50% and the lyrics are 50%. So it's just a complicated thing with that. The writer who wrote the lyrics would own 100% of the lyrics, but it would be 50% of the song. So that sort of stuff is inherently confusing. So, generally, I think when you're working with seasoned musicians who have done it before, it's easier because they understand what the basic premise and principles are around it. And then when, some of the best musicians I've ever worked with, might not really understand or know anything about publishing, and it's confusing. It's like if someone hasn't explained it to you or you haven't gone out and learned about it, it can get really complicated. But it's more simple than it's made out to be. So I just try to have a conversation with the songwriters about, and usually it's the band, depending on the situation, but we'll have a meeting and say like, all right, well, how are we going to split this up? And if I say, well, I wrote, a certain percentage of the lyrics and you wrote a certain percentage of the lyrics, we have to divvy that up and decide how much that is. And then same thing with the music. Sometimes it's cut and dry, like sometimes obviously if somebody wrote all the lyrics and all the music, they would own that side of the publishing. And then there's the whole other aspect of like, there's master is, when you're going to like uh, register like a sync license or anything. Like half of that is the whoever owns the master, which is usually the record company, until that has been returned in recoupables. Like, say you have a $10,000 a recording budget, and with what is it total, for the label, if you sell a song to a commercial and they say, well, we're going to give you $10,000. $5,000 of that goes to the people that own the master, which is usually the record company, and then the writer's share goes to the writers. So it gets complicated, so that like the master has to get paid back, or I'm sorry, the whoever owns the master, which is the record company, they have to recoup the recording
Costs, yeah.
costs, which also like can include having a publicist and having actual printed copies of the vinyl or the CD, and so as long as everybody understands what the rules are, then it's easy generally. But also, that's another reason why it's good to have management, just to be able to double check that stuff and clarify things amongst different artists. But I think that as long as the songwriters themselves can agree in principle to what the terms are, that's always the best way. So I try to be pretty transparent about all that, and just start a discussion. So in some cases, depending on the situation, you could go into like what is, as I understand, like sort of a Nashville kind of a agreement, where I've been in writing sessions where there are four people in the session, and you predetermine that you're all going to split the entire songwriting share. So, the person that comes up with the downside of that is that the person that doesn't contribute as much still gets an equal share.
Yeah.
But it also makes things a lot simpler. So, yeah, I don't know if that's answered your question, but I try to, and in New Orleans, in all fairness, like, it's sort of been a joke as to like, publishing not being, registered correctly. But the other thing is that like, I suggest to everybody that I work with to register with a PRO, so like BMI or ASCAP or
Yeah.
something like that, so that they can actually collect any royalties, as modest as they may be right now. Just to be able to do that and to start their own publishing company, which is something that I think is really important if you actually want to be able to make it easier to streamline the process of collecting any of that. Yeah,
Completely.
sometimes you might be getting a check for $5, but at least you know that it's being accounted for, and that if it ever gets a placement or something in the future, that you're going to be, it's all going to be accounted for.
Exactly.
And
And I think especially where kind of the music industry appears to be nowadays, it doesn't really matter how small the amount of money is. If you've got small amounts of money coming in from various different places, that small amount actually becomes a substantial amount potentially, depending on how many projects and situations you find yourself in, you know? Um, and yeah, you did answer my question. I was just asking because, I find that I do a lot of co-writing. I mean, you know that we've had these discussions. And I find that when you have those discussions beforehand, it's like you said, it's quite easy. It gets it out the way, and you kind of, you know, you feel as though the weird part about it is out of the way. But I've definitely been in situations in the past where hypothetically I'll be the chief songwriter in a band, and a publishing deal will come along, and then suddenly we have to talk about those kinds of things. And because people have played on the recordings, they'll be like, well, I helped write that song. And you'll be like, well, but you didn't help write that song. You played
Mm.
chords that were predetermined. You might have put your spin on it, but and it's always a tricky situation. And I think where the line for me at least gets a little blurry is I think that people still believe that you know your song is going to just generate like $1 million overnight. Like, and I think they're also scared that that's going to happen, that they're all trying to like figure that out. And so it can get really interesting. But to your answer, I think discussing that stuff before it gets kind of registered and stuff is always a very smart thing, you know?
Well, I think, having that discussion beforehand is a lot easier than having it. The later that you get in the process, the more complicated it's going to get.
Completely. Completely.
Potentially, but I think that also, like I said, understanding that, like, unless
Hey, sorry, Joe.
so,
Sorry,
yeah.
can you just repeat that for me, please? You cut out a second.
Oh, yeah, sure. I think that it helps to work with people who understand what publishing, what that actually, when you, and the fact that, like, things are recoupable, and I was in a situation once
Hey,
where,
Joe, I'm sorry, buddy.
yeah.
You cut out again. So basically, I got you up until it said like you said. I think it's tough that people, and then you kind of cut out. So I don't know if it's maybe a connection thing or what, but I'm not even moving. So just letting you know.
Okay,
Sorry.
I'm not moving either, but give me just a second, and maybe I'll just try. Give me one second.
All right.
So, I'm sorry. Could you repeat the question?
Yeah. So no. Basically, we were just saying that you know it's easier to have that discussion earlier on in the process besides instead of sorry not besides instead of waiting till the process is at a point where maybe it's harder to have that discussion.
Yeah, I mean, also the idea that you know, uh, I've been in situations where people think because a certain amount of albums have been sold, and that means that, like, the entire recording budget has been recouped by the record company, and that's just not the case. It's similar with, maybe this is a segue into touring, but, like, you know sometimes people, and I try to be really transparent with this sort of stuff, as much as possible, is like, if someone's offering us a gig for, what looks like a ton of money, for us, especially this year with, all the inflation and airfare prices and gas prices rising dramatically. um, you can get an offer for a gig that sounds incredible, and then you go, well, it's going to cost us like 75% of the offer just to fly there.
Yeah.
And then so you could potentially have a concert that is paying very well, that you could be losing money on, because after you pay commission to the management and the agent, which they certainly deserve, and then after paying the band and then all the travel expenses, you could be, in the red for something that you got paid a lot of money for. So, um, I think that it sort of depends on when I was primarily a side man, I didn't really understand all the nuances of that, and now as a band leader for over 10 years, and being in debt, I uh, I understand the nuances of that much more, and am trying to make better decisions about, what sort of gigs we should accept or not accept. And a lot of times it doesn't have, this year it doesn't have anything to do with the promoter or the offer. It's just that it's just been so expensive to travel.
Yeah. Yeah, you got to almost have your logistics in order, and sometimes they still don't add up,
Yeah, and it's the same thing with making records. Like, if you had a $10,000 budget, and hypothetically, and then you needed to spend $5,000 more um, to do extra overdubbing, studio time, paying extra musicians, longer time to mix and master, whatever the variables are, you still have to do it. So budgets for all this stuff can get very complicated.
Yeah. So let's use that as a bit of a segue before we get into the touring thing too much. If we're thinking about budgets, something that I notice a lot with a lot of the working musicians and the sidemen that I work with, there seem to be two very different type of mindsets. You've got guys who do consider budgets. They kind of thinking of paychecks as, you know, well, I need to split this paycheck over a course of things in case I don't get gigs next month, or I got to use this money to pay off this, etc., etc., etc. And then I've got a whole different kettle of fish in terms of guys who I know some guys who get good money on gigs and are basically spending that money before the gig's over. So I know it sounds ridiculous, but it's true. I mean, I've done gigs with some guys, and I've been very lucky. I've done some nice paying gigs over my life, and I've definitely been in situations where, we we know we're getting a certain amount of money each for a gig, and the guy next to me is like busy buying a new guitar on eBay when there's like no guarantee that we got any gigs coming in. Look, each to their own. I'm not saying that's wrong. All I'm trying to sort of say is, well, actually, I'm not trying to say anything. I want to hear what you've got to say. What advice would you have when it comes to self-employed musicians, whether they're working as band leaders, sidemen, club drummers, or songwriters? It doesn't matter. With any vocation within the industry, have you got any advice when it comes to trying to handle your finances being self-employed in this industry?
Well, that's a loaded question.
Oh, it's a very loaded question. And look, we don't need specifics either. We just I'm in no way trying to sort of preach that people need to do certain things with their money or even with their careers. That's the last thing that this is about. I just think that, and not to sound like a broken record, because I've had this discussion a few episodes ago, but I'm constantly hearing that there's no money in the music industry. But I don't agree.
Yeah,
and secondly, the people that seem to run around saying that, I typically, and I'm stereotyping, but I typically see them not handle their money very well. And I just think that if you're a up and coming musician, or you want to be a musician or work professionally as a musician in sort of this industry in any shape or form, I think you've got to try and learn a little bit about how money works, which sounds super ignorant, but a lot of people don't actually know how money works. It's like they live paycheck to paycheck, and they never seem to get ahead. And I think if you could just educate yourself a little bit, that could potentially change.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm not sure where to start because, we're in I guess the way that I would say is that, it's it's not my job to count other people's money. So whether that's somebody who's making more than me or making less than me or the same or on the same gig or whatever the issue is, and people have extenuating circumstances with different things. I just try to be, from a band leader's perspective, I try to be upfront with people. I generally, have a strategy with like, a rate that I have to pay the guys in my band, like in town for private events, out of town gigs. And, sometimes there are extenuating circumstances where you might have to travel a long way to play one gig, but, um, it pays enough to pay for the amount of time that you're gone. And, it really can just depend. And then there are situations where, um, I think just being transparent and saying, like, hey, this is what it pays. This is how long the trip's going to be. We're driving on this tour. We're flying on this tour. These are the arrangements. And then if people then agree to those terms, then, I expect people to be, live up to their end of the bargain, as long as everything's, communicated and agreed upon mutually and in good faith. Sometimes there are situations where, maybe a gig initially looked like it was going to be no problem. And then, extenuating circumstances can happen with the travel or with having to drive instead of fly or, and there's been a bunch of that, this year because of the cost of travel. Like again, like a lot of the contracts that we had made, much earlier in the year, around the first of the year, just did not have the same amount of, uh, uh, profitability when we got to, plane tickets, that normally cost $400 are now $800, and we're bringing 8 members, and then, you just do the math on that. So, but what I try to do is I try to just, whether I lose money or not, I am going to pay the musicians what I said I was going to pay them. So I think that's just being able to make sure that you're able to cover your expenses and know that inevitably there's going to be experiences where you get on the road and, um, that that van trip that you're taking to Atlanta. Well, there's suddenly the wheels on your tires are, starting to make noise, and you need to get new tires, and that's $1,000, and you need to make sure that you have some sort of backup plan to make sure that that stuff gets covered, or that you have, enough money in a credit limit on a credit card that you can pay for all of the band members in a hotel room. If you're traveling, you hit a snowstorm, and the venue was supposed to pick up the tab, and then you have to miss the gig because you're in a blizzard, and then suddenly you have to house the folks in the band. And I mean, there are just so many scenarios that's true. It's a tightrope because you're trying to make things, budget things so that you can make, especially coming up, making uh, these shows either profitable or at least not lose a lot of money. And, it's different scenarios for different things. If you're in a band where everybody is an equaling contributing member, and, you're able to go out and be, essentially partners with everybody, take it on the liability of all the costs, and then split the profits. That's a different level of commitment than, having an artist who has, uh, you know, um, sidemen, so to speak. So it can get. It's a very, very, very tricky thing. But I would say if I had to give anybody advice, it would be, especially early on, try to establish credit early and really, really protect making sure that you have a good credit score and that you pay all of your bills and pay them on time and, that sort of stuff because most small businesses, which include bands, fail because of lack of credit or capital. So, um, I just try to make sure that I've got a backup plan going into any scenario that I have, including having, we just played a gig about a month and a half ago where the airline lost some of the equipment for one of the band members, and we're dealing with that now. And I have a insurance, potential insurance claim being filed and all this stuff. So it not to scare anybody, but and we're in a situation post COVID where there's a lack of people that are employed at all of these service oriented things like airlines and airports and hotels and ground transportation and doing production at clubs and the whole nine yards. So we're in a pretty tricky situation, and I know that everybody's kind of just doing the best they can. So you got to roll with the punches, I guess.
Yeah, and it's also a testament to how adaptable you have to be, on the road as a band leader, just in general. Um, so let me ask you this: you've got quite a big band. How many people in total?
Well, in theory, 8, but we've had to make some adjustments for that on certain gigs because of the budgets, and you know, sometimes bringing smaller groups. But generally, like if we're playing with the full band, it's 8 musicians.
Okay, so how do you go about finding those musicians, and what are qualities you look for in musicians as a band leader?
Well, again, there are so many different factors. If you're, it's one thing if you're playing in town, like we live here in New Orleans, which is probably one of the last cities that you can, because of the cost of living, that you can survive as a full time musician at a sort of, in the sense that you don't have to leave New Orleans to go on tour. Um, there are enough local gigs that people can scrape it together to be able to have a decent career. So that means that people are generally like very attached to their regular gigs because that's their bread and butter. So if you're expecting a musician who, it depends on their their standing in the music community. If they can take a week or two off and go on the road and still come back and have their gig, then that's generally something that if people want to go and play festivals and stuff like that, rather than just playing on Bourbon Street or Frenchman Street or the local riverboats or at the clubs or whatever. Um, that's something they wanted to do, but not everybody wants to do that. So I try to set up an environment where um, I try to tell people what I'm going to do, and if they are going to be able to do it musically and also deal with the traveling, which is intense. If they're able to be organized and be on time and make sure they can make it to the airport and for lobby call and for all the different things that are involved, crossing borders and stuff like that. Uh, if that's something that they want to do and they're going to enjoy, then I that's the most attractive quality. But I try to get people who want to do that rather than people who are um, doing it sort of at the level of their level of expectation is that they just want to be a side man. I'm kind of caught in the middle sometimes between having uh, band members and who are like committing the effort of their time to this project, and they've got to. I can't employ them as their only gig, so they've got to balance their other gigs. So I just I try to be as flexible as possible, and if people want to be out there with my band and they're having fun and they're enjoying the music and they're able to deal with all the twists and turns of the traveling, that's I mean, you're only on stage for a couple hours a night, and the rest of the time you're basically living together,
Yeah.
in a van, in an airport, in a hotel lobby. It's intense. And depending on the success, of the band and the budget and the travel arrangements, if you have a tour manager and a driver, if you have somebody able to do merch for you, that's great. But right now we're at a position where I'm sort of I'm the tour manager and the band leader and the drummer and settling up with merch and with the with the talent buyer, and it's a lot of stuff. Luckily, we have a great remote tour manager, our boy Julian up in New York, and he handles all the logistics for us and the advancing and everything like that. But uh, you got to be able to get along with everybody on the in the band, and because I think attitudes are infectious, myself included.
Yeah.
So everybody, it's a challenging life, and it's tough to be away from your family or your girlfriend or your partner or boyfriend, whatever. I've got a I've got a 2.5-year-old daughter and a wife, and um, I am saying good night to my daughter a lot of times, through FaceTime when I'm on the road, and that can be emotionally and spiritually challenging as well, being away. So, everything in COVID right now is it seems like it's a whole new world, with all these different nuances and challenges and things. But, I'm hopeful that, we're turning the corner, so to speak, and able to, this is the first year that they've really had music festivals, the first summer.
Completely.
And we had to turn down 3 summers full of European tours because of COVID restrictions and the risks. And like if somebody gets sick on the road and has to quarantine, that's a very complicated situation. Like knock on wood, we haven't had to deal with that too much yet. We've had to deal with it a little bit, but it can get very complicated very quickly when you're dealing with having to keep somebody quarantined and then get subs, and even if it's just locally in town, it can get complicated because, as we all know, it can kind of come out of nowhere, and then whether you've been exposed or not, and all of the protocols that I believe are in place for a reason, and have helped sort of calm the the continuation of this pandemic, and sort of get it a little bit more in check. It's a lot, man.
Yeah. And also, something that I think, again, maybe isn't considered is, let's say you're in town doing a gig or even on the road doing a gig, it doesn't really matter. And one of your members get COVID and you've got to dip that out. That changes the chemistry within the band, and sometimes, once you spend so much time with a certain amount of guys, especially on the road and stuff, hopefully, if all goes well, you become kind of like a close knit family. It doesn't always work that
Sure.
way, but more often than not. And, to suddenly bring someone in, especially if they haven't had to dep for that band before, that can be quite foreign, should we say. So it's just like all these, again, you mentioned the word earlier, but all these variables that are just so interesting. And if you're not willing to adapt, can really make your life quite difficult.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we're seeing a lot in the music industry, people trying to manage a better work-life uh, ratio, and have a more manageable um, time with work, and with mental health is now. Oh, sorry about that. Those are my
No
dogs.
problem at all. I saw that
Um,
Instagram picture with your one dog and the bunny ears on. That was adorable.
oh yeah, they're a hoot, but always challenging to try to record anything with them around. Um, but like I was saying, mental health is now being recognized more than it ever has been in the industry, and I think that's a super positive thing.
I think so too.
I really, I've had my personal struggles with it, and I'm also in recovery. I've been in recovery for since 2009, so like 12 and a half years,
Congratulations, man.
maybe a little more. Thank you. So I have to be careful about, being able to focus on my recovery while I'm out, in these murky waters.
Yeah,
And, I think it's important that everybody is able to focus on self care and focus on their mental health. And there are a lot of pitfalls out here for everybody, whether with alcohol and drugs and all this stuff. Whether runs the gamut of whether you're struggling with them or abusing them or dependent on them or in recovery or trying to get into recovery or have long-term recovery or whatever, or you relapse after a certain amount of time. I mean, all this stuff is can can be a tough road to manage, but I really try to be transparent about my own needs with the guys that I'm working with, and like respect their whatever their journey is, and not to be judgmental because if I don't drink or do drugs, that nobody else can have a few beers or whatever the case may be. Like a lot of so many of the states and provinces in Canada, it's legal to buy weed, and I'd say more power to them. But like I also have to be able to make some boundaries for myself on like what can be done in green rooms and in the van and backstage and all that sort of stuff, just for my own self preservation. So
completely. And that's tough,
yeah.
man. I mean, that's admirable because uh, I know that certain vices are basically expected when you with certain musicians, and it's to be constantly fighting that monkey off your back when it might be going on. That is strength right there, dude. So power to
Well, I
you,
don't,
man.
thanks, man. I will be the first to say that I don't do it on my own, and like being in 12-step programs has helped me realize that it's I need to. It's like they say it's a we program. So you know I have to do this with other people in recovery. You sort of have to be able to give it away to keep it, and so and it actually, if it weren't for COVID, I think we wouldn't have established such an amazing recovery network on things like platforms like Zoom,
Mm.
and I can go to a meeting um, in an airport, in a van, anywhere that I have a connection. Uh, I can jump on and be a part of that, which is something that has always historically been very challenging to go find meetings because when you're on the road, you're pretty much constantly traveling, and whether you're going to you know the airport or you're driving to the gig and then you're loading in and going to sound check and then hopefully eat something and then like it would be totally amazing to be able to go check into the hotel and grab a shower and nap and come back before you have to play, but sometimes that doesn't even happen depending on how far you have to travel.
Yeah.
So trying to squeeze finding a meeting that aligns with your schedule and driving there and being in person and the whole 9 yards uh, can be almost impossible sometimes. So to be able to jump on while I'm en route to whatever gig we're going to next is just has opened up a whole new world
Yeah, that's incredible.
to me. Yeah,
Absolutely incredible. I'm really glad that's
yeah,
happening. So,
yeah.
so Joe, listen, I'm not going to keep you much longer. I told you we would be a certain amount of time, but I do want to just ask one or two more things.
Sure.
First thing, if you could go back in time in your musical career, is there anything you would have done differently?
I would have taken a music business class.
Ah, and that's actually a really good answer. So when you were at Berkeley, did they not go into that kind of stuff?
Well, no, they did, but I didn't. I was young and naive, and um, like, oh, I just want to play drums, and then of course, like you're in a situation where you've got all these things that we've been discussing. Um, educating yourself is knowledge is power.
Co-
Straight up. So, I think, especially now that. Uh, we rely on things like sync licensing so much more than maybe we used to as an industry. Now it's possible for relatively undiscovered artists to be able to get a placement in a TV commercial, you know, social media post, whatever the media is, whatever the screen is, and actually monetize that. And understanding how all that stuff works, I think, is something that is really, really helpful. And yeah, I mean, if and again, mixing when art and commerce meet, it's always a unnatural type of experience because most artists are focused on their art, and most managers or people in the business are focused on being able to sell that, which is their job. You know, but when they come together, you got to be able to understand some of the basic language. Otherwise, you're setting yourself up for a situation that you might not understand, and that can always be tricky. Period. But luckily, I'm really fortunate. I have an amazing team of managers and agents and amazing entertainment attorney and just really. But I would emphasize that as as an artist is like try to really try to surround yourself with people that are focused and professional.
Yeah.
Try to develop your team. Attract the best manager that you can get. Somebody who aligns with your vision. Is going to have your best interest in mind. Eventually when you start making, if start having record deals and stuff like that, you're going to want to have a good entertainment attorney to be able to negotiate for you on certain terms, and be able to have a really good agent who is either has the a broad reach that can give you, I mean, hopefully it's somebody who has a broad reach and is in line with your artistic views. But, if you get a, a relatively inexperienced manager or agent that is willing to go to bat for you all the time, that can in some ways be better hypothetically than getting somebody who has a ton of reach, a ton of influence, but you're like at the bottom of their priority
Yeah,
list.
totally.
So, but I've been very fortunate to be surrounded by great managers and great agents and all that sort of stuff.
That's awesome, man. All right, Joe, last question, man. And again, a bit of a broad, fully loaded one, but what do you think the best advice you've ever received in relation to your music career has ever been?
Well, I think the best advice that I ever got was from Quincy Jones when I was 18 years old. Um, and that's a whole nother story how I got to run into Quincy Jones when I was 18. But long story short, my dad's in the business. He was in the broadcasting business, and I went to a convention Quincy Jones was at, actually in New Orleans. And I very kind of like, sheepishly was like waiting around for him to, um, you know, end his conversations with these other people that were obviously, like in the industry. I was just, like I was going around with my dad. So I asked him what advice he would give a 18-year-old freshman at Berklee College of Music. Also, sidebar, he was one of the first arranging students at Berklee, like one of the first classes before it was even an accredited school, like back in the 50s, maybe. So it was sort of a legendary fixture at Berkeley's history. So I went up to him and I said, well, what advice would you give me? And he looked at my name tag, which said Joseph on it, and he said, well, Joseph, and he kind of looked down at the tag. He looked straight at it and he said, get good. And he must have seen the crestfallen look on my face, where I was like, I was thinking to myself, I'm trying to get good, and he said, look, there's more to it than that. He said, most artists spend most of their time trying to sell themselves when they haven't spent that time developing their art. So if you can spend the time on developing your art, it will sort of sell itself. It's something that you should try to perfect, and then people, when it's ready for the world, people will recognize it. And so I think that although that's a massive generalization, I think that there is a lot to be said for that. Like if you, I think as an artist is, especially if you're young, I mean, there's some amazing artists that are like, world famous. And when I went to the Grammys this year, I was on the red carpet, behind some of these artists that were like, they're way younger than I am, and they're multi-platinum stars. But for someone like myself, I keep trying to nail down what the best version of what I'm going to present to an audience is, and it's about the journey, not the destination, because you can get all sorts of awards and be popular or famous or have money or whatever that and still be miserable.
Completely.
So I think that it's good advice for people who are starting out, because if you're not enjoying the process, if it's something like I sort of feel like music chose me. I didn't choose music. So if you're not really there, like man, like go to business school, like go do something that's gonna, be a solid career that you can maybe make some money at or something like that. But and also just save your money and try to be wary about, getting into a scene of music where you're playing with a lot of people who are getting high or drunk.
Yeah.
It's just not going to help the music that much. That's just my own experience.
No, I agree.
I thought differently when I was younger, but that's just my honest opinion.
No, I do agree, man. And I know that there's certain movements.
And I can only share my own experience.
Yeah.
So that's
that's
why.
I think that's awesome, man. And super cool that you got to meet Quincy as well. I mean, what a legend, man.
Oh, I mean, he's like the coolest guy ever.
That's so cool. Well, Joe, dude, thank you as usual for your time. And
my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
I'll link some show notes, as I mentioned earlier. I'll link some links into the show notes so that people know where to find you and stuff like that. And dude, you're the man, man.
You're the man.
No, you're the man.
You're the man.
Hey, listen, man, enjoy the rest of your day. I will talk to you soon.
I appreciate it, man. I'll talk to you soon. Take care.
Thanks, dude. Bye.
All right, later.
Alrighty, man. Episode 5, done, dusted, in the can. I want to thank my buddy Joe for giving me his time. I want to thank you for listening. And, check out musicians-mentor.com for more. My name's Travis Mark. Keep pushing. Keep working towards those dreams. You can do it. Thanks for listening, and I'll talk to you next time. Peace.